That better, Benita? Yeah. Excellent. We all good to go, Maureen?
Right.
Yeah. Tēnā koutou katoa, and a mana and a reo and a kamakanga maha no mai haere mai ka mihi ake tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone. We just start with the opening karakia. Waka takateo ki te ruru, waka takateo ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tala tala ki taia, kia ihi aki ana te atakura, e tio, e luka, e rohi. Tutu o wiki wakamoa kia tina, ue, taiki. Welcome everyone and welcome to our new meeting room layout that's been set out to help live streaming. It's just easier for people to get a sense of the room, but I think it actually works better from this side.
This is how some of us used to know.
I heard.
Great.
Yeah. That's good. So welcome everyone. And welcome to those on Zoom, to Benita, and also welcome to the Policy and Planning Committee reps who've been invited to join for the agenda on the economics of freshwater management. So I see we have Mitchell on Zoom, so welcome Mitchell too.
Excuse me, Matt.
Yeah,
I'm just going to go to IT because I think they have a...
Yes, so Diligent did a thing where everyone has to put their email address in this morning. So is everyone's Diligent working? Is yours working, Neil? Or
no, but we've made...
You've got something you've got to work around? So Donald, is your Diligent not working?
It's working, but it's just I can't get into it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll truck on with the minutes. And if there's something you need your papers for, Donald, shout out and I'll make sure that you're caught up. We'll also have Emma Rand from EM Consulting joining us for the meeting too on Zoom. Welcome Emma to the meeting. And we have no apologies for the meeting, which is great. So our first agenda item is the confirmation of the ordinary council minutes of the 25th of June 2024. Are there any matters with the accuracy of those minutes or matters arising to wish to raise? Yeah, Mike wasn't capturing apologies, so that's been updated into the minutes. Thanks, my apologies for that. So no issues with those minutes. So I'm happy to move that those minutes are confirmed. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Tom. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, nay. Those minutes are confirmed. The next agenda item 5 is the confirmation of the Operations and Regulatory Committee minutes of the 23rd of July 2024. Susan, do you have anything you wish to raise to people's attention on that?
No, they are, in my view, accurate.
Right, so we're receiving these minutes and adopting the recommendations therein. Are you happy to move?
I am.
Susan, do I have a seconder to receive those minutes? Thank you, Donna. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, nay. Those recommendations carried. Agenda item 6 is confirmation of the Policy and Planning Committee minutes of the 23rd of July 2024. And I chaired that meeting in Craig's absence, and there isn't anything I wish to bring to the committee's, to the council's attention. So I'm happy to move those recommendations and to receive those minutes. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Susan. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary.
Donna wasn't at that meeting.
Yeah, it was at the 23rd of July.
That's the one on the 23rd of July. You've got apology down there.
I was late. My battery. I had a flattish battery. Yeah.
So those, if there's so we're not actually confirming these minutes. The committee confirms the minutes, but if there's any accuracies, let Marie know and she can do it for when the committee. Or if there's any issues with recommendations, that's the key one to get right. Thanks, guys. Agenda item 7 is confirmation of the Executive Audit and Risk Committee minutes of the 29th of July 2024. Tom, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, just item 4, the Tony Parr presented his Harbour Masters report, which probably all read, but that was very positive and no real issues down the from his front. Good activities and a lot of safe people getting the message now, and he's working more rather than infringements, just talking to people that may just go over the line a little bit. So we thought that was a good approach. And also on number 5, page 22, the public transport, we had a good discussion on that, and we had representatives of the District Council and Soraya on that discussion, or they weren't part of the discussion, but listening in. So there was, it was good feedback.
Yeah, it was a really good discussion.
And since then, we've had a meeting with New Plymouth District Council, some of their councillors that you attended, and one or two of us did, Susan, on last Friday, just to move things forward. So
yeah, really productive meeting.
Really good. Apart from that, I'm happy to move the thing.
Great. Do I have a seconder to adopt those recommendations? Thank you, Neil. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, nay. Those minutes received and adoption and recommendations adopted. Moving to agenda item 8 is the Taranaki Economy and Freshwater Management paper. To do this, I grant any policy and planning reps present rights to speak, which I understand is just Mitch at the moment. Yep. So Lisa's going to introduce this item, and Emma will be doing the presentation too. So over to you, Lisa.
Paul. Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. We thought, just to, I guess, give a bit of an overview, as part of the development of the Land and Freshwater Plan, we have commissioned Emma Morand to undertake a baseline report for us, which is what you can see up on screen, the Taranaki Economy and Freshwater Management. This work helps us to inform the policy development as we go, and I guess it's a key point which Emma will kind of touch on as well as she goes through, but it's a starting point in how we start to think about the economy and our policy drafting as well. It's quite a meaty document, so we thought it would be worthwhile getting Emma to take you all through, I guess, a bit of an overview of it. Emma's happy to answer any questions and queries as we go through this. And then at the end, Finbar and I will just kind of close off with a couple of slides on what this means, I guess, and where we're at this point in time in our work program. So I will hand over to Emma Moran. Emma, I have the clicker, so let me know when you want me to flick through your slides.
Sure. Good morning, everyone.
Do you want questions as you go, Emma, or questions at the end?
I think it's easier as we go. So just feel free to interrupt. And it's difficult online to see if there are any questions. So please just turn in to me.
Yep. So council members, just speak up if you've got questions and interrupt.
So I appreciate this opportunity. It's always good to be able to share the work that you've done. So I'm intending just to give you a brief overview of the report. As Lisa's already said, it's quite a large report and it's impossible to really do it justice in a meeting. It's part of the development of the Regional Land and Freshwater Plan for Taranaki. I have 15 years experience on this topic, and that's particularly from a regional perspective. And all the work that I've done to date has the approach that I've taken has been working with various sectors to make sure that the analysis is as balanced as possible and really on a firm footing. The main purpose of the report is to build understanding. I need to acknowledge that Gary McDonald and Market Economics were key contributors to the really extensive data sets that formed the basis of the report. And there were also important contributions from Beef and Lamb New Zealand, Dairy NZ, Horticulture New Zealand, and as you'll see if you've had a look through it, the farmers that were interviewed, and they really provided important qualitative information that rounded out a lot of the data that we had. So if we flick on, very briefly, this is the plan for the presentation. I'll touch on why economics matters in this work, the basics of an economic impact assessment. I'll give you a quick overview of the report and touch on some of its highlights, but there are many, many highlights. So it's really just a few that I've grabbed out of quite a lot. And then I'll just turn to what else might be needed in terms of future work. And then Lisa and Finbar Kittle have a couple of slides at the end. Do you want to click on? Yeah. So very briefly, regional councils traditionally put a huge amount of effort into science, and economics is has not really been seen as core business. It is incredibly important, though, to understand the way the economy works within your region, particularly because when we talk about environmental management, we're not so much really suggesting that we're managing the natural environment. What is really that really is about is managing our activities within that natural environment. So understanding those activities is really key. The economics isn't just about understanding how the impacts of policy. It's really important for building into your policy development. And then the council also has an opportunity later to manage impacts in the way that it implements policy. And I think that's something that's often quite neglected, is the implementation process and how that rolls out can really be quite important. There are regulatory requirements for doing this work. With the notification of the plan, there's a Section 32 evaluation report which summarises the process, and the economics is an essential input into that. But I think more broadly, building your community's confidence in decision making along with the science is where this really has value. In terms of an economic impact assessment, in its most basic sense, it measures a change in something, and that could be something like the plan, which is the case here, but it might be something like an event, a rugby game, or maybe like the Olympics. So you've got an existing starting point or situation, often that's referred to as the baseline, and then you're measuring or forecasting how that might change as a result of the thing that's in front of you. And what's quite you need to be quite clear about is that you're measuring the plan. There's other things happening all around that, and they influence the impacts, but they're not directly as a result of the change you're considering. I just want to check that makes sense to people.
Yep, makes sense to me.
So a good example of that is if you have stock exclusion regulations, that's something that's already been decided at a national level. You might be implementing it through your plan, but that requirement is not because of the plan. It will influence people's ability, though, to do other things, which may be actions that you're bringing in through your plan. When you are changing something, the critical phase is really the transition, the change process as people shift from one situation to another. Yeah. So, as Lisa's already mentioned, this report is really about establishing the starting point, that baseline, the way the economy is working at the moment in terms of land and fresh water, and then you'll need to do some analysis later once the plan is developed to really see what that end point might look like. Yeah, flick on. Is everyone following where I've got to so far?
Yep.
Okay. When you do economics, a lot of people sort of quite sort of focused on what will something cost? What are the benefits? What are the costs? We'll come back to this later, but it's always a very difficult question to answer. I think the purpose of this report is really to build understanding of the way the economy works in relation to your natural resources, and then that is used in your policy development. And then that actually puts you in a much better position further down the track to understand what the benefits and costs might be of your plan. This report covers a lot of territory. The environmental context is very important. When I'm talking about economics, I'm not just talking about financial stuff. It recognises that soil and fresh water are part of the economy as well as being part of the natural environment. There's chapters on the freshwater, different scales within Taranaki that are relevant. So the freshwater management units, the 3 districts and their characteristics. And then it looks more in depth at the rural sectors, and then broadens out to characterise the economy as a whole. It considers these different scales because impacts play out differently at different scales, and we'll come back to that. It also critically looks at a variety of measures, economic measures, because you actually, if you really want to get a handle on something, you need to have more than one perspective on it. And it uses a range of information sources, and I mentioned those previously. The focus throughout the report is really on it's sort of more of a systems approach. It identifies connections within the economy and tries to really highlight the diversity that's going on across the region. Thank you. One of the fundamental characteristics of Taranaki is the quite balanced shares of different types of land that you have. I don't know whether the council's familiar with land use capability classes. Essentially, they look at the versatility of productive land. On this graph here, the very best land is the land that's coloured in blue, so LUC 1 and 2. And then as you get run into the greens, you're starting to get some natural constraints on the versatility of that land, whether that might be wetness or slope, soil quality, those sort of things. And then your more marginal land is into those yellows and oranges. What's quite unique about Taranaki is you have a very large share of LUC5 land, which we'll come back to later. But that's quite across New Zealand. Pardon?
Can I just do a time check? How long do you expect your presentation to last? I'm just conscious of where you're through your presentation at the moment and how long it's taken. So I just wanted to check in.
Once I get through this wee bit, I'll probably rip through the rest of it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So Taranaki is a lot like Southland, has a very balanced sort of spread of different land use types, and that really plays a huge influence on the economy. If you flick on to the next slide. So you'll see here I've just picked 10 different regions, and Taranaki's sitting there in the middle, and you can see Southland on the right-hand side. Some of those other regions have far larger shares of the more marginal land or the less versatile land, and that this here will be a huge influence in the way your policy develops and then the way that the economic impacts play out. And we'll see that when we get to the dairy stuff. So if you flick on again, you all know the slide. You can read about it in the report. I mean, you'll know the information this slide's presenting. It's really looking at the rural-urban split and the difference in the characteristics between your different districts. Critically, 50 years ago, you had pretty much an even split between your urban and rural populations across the region. The point here is that the economic impacts of the plan will play out differently by district because of this distribution between rural and urban settlements. If you go on to the next slide. I mentioned previously that scale is important when thinking about economic impacts. Here we're looking at income distribution by district, and you can see when you look at the colour bands that there are some differences, but sort of they're fairly similar. So this is personal income. If you go on to the next slide, you can see that if you go below the district level and you're looking at the communities, there's huge variation. And I think recognising that in policy development and your implementation process is really important. Just stop there in case there's any questions.
No, you're good, Karen.
If you go on to the next slide. So now I'm just moving into the agricultural chapters of the report. This graph uses livestock units, which is a way of converting the different livestock classes into a common unit. A single livestock unit is a ewe with a lamb at foot. So a sheep is basically worth one, and when you're getting into your dairy cattle, it can be 7 or 8 livestock units. So looking at this graph, the blue line at the top is total livestock units, and that's changed over the last 50 years quite significantly, from 7.2 million down to 5.5 million. So it's a decrease in the amount of pressure, if you're thinking about that in terms of livestock numbers. The dairy cattle have increased, your sheep have decreased, but what this graph doesn't calculate is how you've had changes in breeds and increases in production over time. So a lot of your livestock have got bigger, they've got more efficient, but basically it's not telling the full story. So while you've got fewer livestock, you've actually got a lot of increases in production, and we'll come back to this when we look at supplementary feed in a minute. So this is just the point I made on the previous graph, but looking at that in terms of changes in production for dairy over the last 30 years. And you can see there the effective area and the total cow numbers has been fairly stable in Taranaki, but the increase in milk solids has been quite dramatic. So the axis on the right-hand side is measuring the milk solids. Are there any questions on that graph?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Just 5 more minutes, Emma, if you can wrap up.
Sure. The driver in the production, one of the reasons for that has been the huge increase in supplementary feed. Roughly equates to about 20% of a dairy cow's dry matter now. If you click on again. A key point of the report is that the dairy land in Taranaki actually is situated on some of these higher land use classes. So at least 20% of dairy farmland is LUC 5 and above, and that means that you've got an awful lot of diversity within Taranaki compared to other regions. If you flick on again. The sheep and beef farms have also been changing over time. So you've had farms getting a lot larger, and the proportions of the different topographies have changed over time. So there's more grazed land on sheep and beef farms than there used to be. If you flick on again. So this graph is just really about the structure of the Taranaki economy. The colour of the graph is by district. So yellow is the Plymouth district, the green is South Taranaki, and the blue is Stratford. One of the things that I wanted, if you go on again, one of the things that I really wanted to bring through was the importance of looking at different economic measures. So there's always a big focus on value added or profitability, but actually what's quite important for the economy in terms from your perspective, I think, is that the amount of expenditure as well that occurs from different businesses. So for example, on average, sheep and beef farms in Taranaki would, even though they're relatively less profitable than your dairy farms, they would spend about $500,000 within your local economies per farm. I don't think we need to touch on the rest of that there. I'm not going to read it out. If you flick on again. I'll skip past this in the interest of time. Lisa, do you want to go to your slides?
I can do. So as we thought it might be worthwhile just giving everybody, I guess, a couple of examples of how we're currently using the work that Emma's done at the moment. Bearing in mind, as she said at the start, there'll be more work to be doing in more in-depth detail as policy development continues. But that point Emma made before about the diversity in dairy, acknowledging that all of our sectors do have an element of diversity, but the fact that we've got dairying occurring on a wide range of different land uses in Taranaki is quite unusual in comparison to other dairy regions in New Zealand. So that probably lends ourselves to be thinking a little bit more about a nuanced policy approach about how we might be managing some of the effects from dairy going forward. So that example of the LUC land, we know LUC 5 and above, good management practices on those areas may be more challenging to implement. There's higher production return being needed from those farms. They're not as productive, I guess, as some of the other LUCs. So there's different things at play for those farmers that are operating in that area. And the other examples, which you will all be well familiar with, I guess, is the high altitude, high rainfall areas of some of our dairy farms as well. How do we respond to the challenges that they might have going forward, particularly when we're looking at dairy effluent discharges? The other point too, just to make, is that they're relatively, which Emma didn't touch on in her presentation, but it's in the report, the relatively small farm size, I guess, that we have here in Taranaki. Some of the debt levels that some of our industries are carrying, all of that helps us, is one of, I guess, the key inputs or key things we need to be thinking about in deciding how fast what that pace of change is, how fast we ask for actions to be implemented, and what is reasonable, I guess, to see improvements occur over time. And then that other point that Emma mentioned, whilst stocking rates and numbers have been relatively stable, I guess, at a crude level in the region for a number of years, that change in breeds, the supplementary feed coming in, those kind of things are important considerations for us to be thinking about how we might be approaching things like limit setting going forward. It's not as simple as just kind of saying a certain kind of rate of animal leads to a certain outcome. So there's some examples, I guess, of some of the things the team's starting to work through at the moment as we progress with the policy development specifically for land and freshwater plan. But Finbar's got a couple of points, I think, more broadly from a Taranaki perspective.
So taking this report, I guess I've been doing some thinking around, relative to the plan, but just more broadly the council, about the council and what we do. So some things that jump out, and this is kind of obvious to everyone here, but it is highlighted in the report that land use in Taranaki is unique. And therefore we need, it points to the importance of the plan, and you can't rely on national regulation to do all this kind of stuff, because there are some characteristics of our land use which really does affect how you manage things. Look, the reality is the economic picture is pretty gloomy across oil and gas, dairy, sheep and beef. It's not a good picture. However, the counterpoint to that is, if not now, when? Because over the medium to long term, it's like, without being too pessimistic, it's still gloomy when you're looking at the future of the oil and gas industry, or starting to pile on the effects of climate change onto the regional economy. And then intensification and amalgamation is occurring. I guess it kind of depends on how you define intensification. But really interesting that, we've heard a lot from the community that stocking numbers have been stable in Taranaki. So then how is the environmental water quality still declining? And I guess some of the evidence in this report points to, of course, there's more to factor in here, but that point around change in breeds or change in feedstock and things like that, and how that might have flow-on effects, like Lisa said. And this is another kind of obvious one, but I think what's highlighted in the report is that how policy and regulation affects the economy is really complicated, and we won't get it right in terms of, there will always be unforeseen circumstances, and that's the importance of having that ongoing policy review, so you're constantly changing your approach. One thing that I think a lot about is how our regulatory environment, both for the council and nationally, affects the incentives towards forestry. And you saw that thing, right? Like, while it might make economic sense for an individual farmer to convert to pine, either commercial or just for carbon credits, that still has big impacts for the regional economy in terms of a decrease in the flow-on spend. I don't have the numbers, but the assumption is your average spend for a forestry block is going to be a hell of a lot less than for a sheep and beef farm in the region. And that's something that we need to be aware of. Yeah, finished it.
Great, thanks for that overview. Great to see the work started, and we've got that baseline. And really interesting findings from it. I'm open to the council for questions, but any officers? I see Emily's joined us on Zoom. Welcome, Emily.
I just
got Neil.
Firstly, just like to say I enjoyed reading this very comprehensive report, and I think every little corner, everything was covered, and it's really good to have that kind of background information. So that's good, and I basically agree with what Finbar's saying, except to say that I think that it does show us that diversification. So while forestry seems to be in people's minds always pine trees, there are other things, and other people are doing other things. And the actual fact of the matter is that a lot of sheep farmers and people who have beef, who have poor areas that they've converted to carbon, now have another income which is coming in, and a significant one. So one of the problems you've got has always been with them is they're so poor and other that they haven't been able to go for diversified activities of various sorts. So I think that is something we must try to, I don't know if it's our place to encourage, but it's certainly something that's going ahead. If we can get more people to spread their activities to honey or to carbon or to whatever it is, without actually reducing these other things, it gives them the diversity to continue on when the market is open.
I was going to say, the first thing I did when I saw this report, it was forward it onto around regional people, because it's such a great collection of Taranaki economic information that's so useful to other people. So I've forwarded it around to Veg Taranaki and the like. And also it's good, I think the more we share it, the more people look at it and also just add their viewpoints, because I think there's many different viewpoints feeding in is a good thing. But I'll let you look like this respond.
Through you, Chair, just to note, Councillor Walker, it's a good point. I was probably overly gloomy in terms of the economic picture and forgot to say there are lots of people in the region doing really interesting stuff and trying new things, and there's lots of reasons to be optimistic there. And for the question for the council at that strategic level is, be it through a policy framework or through non-regulatory stuff or just working with farmers? How do you support them to try things?
And our plan, if we follow our timeline, would likely become active in what time?
So once it's through you, Chair, once it's notified, which we're aiming for the middle of next year, it does then have some legal weight at that point in time.
Yeah.
But I guess it's probably 18 months or so until it probably would likely become fully operative once you've gone through like a hearings process. And
Yeah, so what I was thinking is, our current plan is 23 years old. So trying to do economic impact where you're thinking about a plan that's not even going to start for a time period and then is going to last is quite a tricky business. Emily, I see you've got your hand up.
Morena koutou. Thank you for this report. It was really interesting. I guess my criticism, is that, and I haven't read it word for word, it's just that I don't think it goes back far enough or forwards far enough. I think I saw like one graph around Māori land use, one image, but there was no real explanation of how we use the land. And, there's graphs that MFA put out a few years ago showing pollen evidence of how Māori came here and, deforested the land a little bit, but pretty much we found the equilibrium within the environment and lived quite peacefully and healthily for, I think it was about three centuries until the colonial settlers came, and then, the forests were trashed, and we have what we have now. So if it would have been good to have that kind of bigger picture look, but also looking forwards, having some kind of analysis of what's going to happen when we can't afford fossil fuels, not so much just stopping extracting them from Taranaki, but on a global scale, once we don't have fossil fuels that are affordable, the 95% of that dairy will not move overseas. And that's going to have a massive impact on our economy. So if we're just going to wait till that hits us and our economy falls over, that's bad planning. So we need to really actually be pushing for this diversity and local economy plan. We have no plan. But so I'm just, this information is useful, but I think it could go further. I think that's all.
Yeah, I think, I guess it's that question of where you setting the baseline, which we're setting the baseline now. So I guess the historical information is, as you said, useful to forecasting forward. It's also conscious that this plan is kind of a 10-year time frame, isn't it? So that's kind of the time frame that we're thinking about. So making sure we're taking in those characteristics of what we think will happen in the next 10 years. So I think we're all operating on those assumptions. Is that about right?
Well, that's certainly, and look, at least with Finbar, that's the current requirement is 10-year timeframes to work towards effectively a position that the government's of the day set. Now that position, of course, as we know, is under review. So we'll see how that goes, but certainly currently the requirement is to have effectively 10-year milestones. So it is much narrower than the scope of what Emily's raising in terms of, and deliberately so, because it's been done for a specific purpose, but does give information that's much more, that is useful for broader strategy work that Emily's hinting at in there. Things like, if regional spatial planning, or in fact, we can do it anyway, irrespective of what position the government might take. Some of that longer term thinking, we can think about how we may or may not want to do some of that planning anyway.
I'm sorry, I just forgot one thing. Just wanted to note that when we look at the population spread of who are the farmers, I think we're looking at, is it between a third and a quarter of our population? So when we think of fairness, we shouldn't really just be focusing on farmers' needs, because they are, in a weird way, a minority that have the majority of the land. So it would be good to have broader interviews with more of the population out here to get just a more balanced opinion on what is fair.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine with this plan, we're going to look at how district councils use wastewater and stormwater, which will have an impact on everyone. So the plan will need to be comprehensive in that. And my understanding is, it's more about the economic impacts. So we look at the flow and impacts to the GDP. So it's not necessarily about a population of farmers. It's about the economic impact to the whole region. So it does consider everyone. is mine, but I'll let the experts. I'll just let any
through you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, in terms of some of the broader perspective from the wider population, Lisa can speak a lot now in terms of the feedback we've got through the consultation process we've got going underway. The purpose of these interviews was really just to understand how farmers are using their land and where they're feeling the pinch, just in terms of how that will affect a set of our population.
Great, thanks. Donald.
Madam Chairman, I just question the assumption there that 22% of dairy cow feed is imported. They might be fed supplements by 22%, but a lot of it may be not grown on the dairy platform, but not imported into Taranaki. So I think there's just needs to be a little bit of clarity around that, because I know there's a lot of palm kernel comes in, but if you look at it in a dry matter going into an animal, it's only a small percentage of the total input. So
yeah, good point. Yeah, I think that's why it's great to circulate the report so people can have a read. And if there's obviously you can get data, but there's a whole lot of nuances behind it, so people can provide feedback. So we're as informed as we can be about different things to consider. Great, just conscious of time and see everyone's no further hands up. So we have the recommendations on page 26 to receive this report and note the presentation. Thank you, Emma, for zooming into our meeting and all the work you've done and providing that update. So do I have a proposer for those recommendations? Thank you, Neil, and seconder. Thank you, Craig. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, nay. Next agenda item is the 2025 meeting schedule. Nicole, introducing this item. And I must say, wonderful to have it so early, so everyone can get into their diary.
We aim to
bloody scary, madam.
Yeah.
We aim to please, Charlotte.
Especially when it's got the next election in there already. But yep. Over to you, Nicole.
All right, so this is the first of many items that I'm bringing you today. Keeping to tradition, the cycles are planned 6 weekly. We've avoided putting any of the meetings within school holidays. We've also proposed that the dates for the meetings that will occur post the elections and the triennial meeting. So just to note that they might be subject to change should the incoming council desire. I'm more than happy to discuss anything in relation to those proposed dates or to take any direction that you provide through the chief executive around any changes you'd like.
Great, thanks, Nicole. And it pretty much follows the same kind of schedule we do. And I know the team have really listened to feedback they've got around aligning things and taken all back to the council. Thanks for doing that.
We've got around this.
Well, I don't think anyone, well, maybe Craig's got school children to think about, but it's also community.
How many farmers have you got?
Community staff.
Community.
Some of you might have grandchildren.
So I don't hear a roar of people with
dicey time for farmers.
Yeah, I don't have a roar of issues with things. So yeah, if you do have a slight thing, feel free to raise with Steve, and then we can just tweak that as needed. But otherwise, and then can lock it down and get it out to everyone so they can put the dates in their diaries. So we have the recommendations on page 2028. I'm happy to move them. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Susan. All those in favour say aye. So the contrary, nay, that's carried. Agenda item 10 is the meeting dates for August and September 2024. We have the recommendation to receive and note those dates. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Craig, and a seconder. I'm happy to second. All those in favour say aye.
Right.
To the contrary, nay, those received. Agenda item 11 is the local government members determination 2024-2025, and Nicole is speaking to this as well.
So attached to the memorandum that we've prepared for you is the latest communication from the Remuneration Authority on the local government members determination. As indicated in the report, the determination provides for an increase of remuneration to 3.7%, with allowances and hearing fees being maintained. Shortly after the agenda item was released, we received an amendment which specifically relates to mileage rates. So that's indicated in the second attachment there. Between Mike and I, would be happy to answer any questions that you might have in relation to it.
Great. Any questions? Discussion? Everyone happy to receive? Great. To have a mover. Thank you, Tom, and a seconder, Susan. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
So the contrary, nay. Those recommendations carried. Agenda item 12 is remits for the Local Government New Zealand Annual General Meeting 2024, which is the agenda item we have every year where there are 8 remits going to LG&Z. In fact, I'll stop speaking because Nicole's introducing this and I'm stealing your thunder.
I was more than happy for you to continue, Charlotte. So the AGM will be held on Wednesday, the 21st of August, as our chairperson is attending. She's been appointed as the presiding delegate, and Councillor Walker is also attending. So we've suggested that he be appointed as the alternate presiding delegate in the event that Chair Littlewood is unable to attend. The remits are presented to Council today for you to consider whether you'd like to provide any pre-AGM direction to the Chair, whether you're in support for or otherwise any of the remits. They have gone through a screening process with LGNZ, and as Charlotte mentioned, there are 8 there that we've attached for you to review. Outlined in the report, Council may support a proposed remit, decide that it does not have a position, or allow the delegate to make a decision at the meeting once they've heard anyone that wishes to speak to the remits. If Charlotte would like to lead us through that discussion.
So me and Neil will be at the AGM. So what we often do is people say, well, there's often debate about the remits at the AGM, which kind of informs the discussion. So often the direction is leave it to whoever's there to just make a call on the day. But as we go through these, if people have strong views to support or not support, it's really helpful to inform that, and we can make sure we, as accurately as possible, represent what the whole council thinks. So 8 remits. The first one is to advocate for changes that support the provision of timely and accurate regional and sub-regional population data to councils for use in council representation reviews. Any views on this one from anyone? Yeah, I was a bit like the census has a strict timeline, and that's, it's used for a whole bunch of things. So I can't see local government elections being top of the list of priorities, but I'm happy to see how the debate goes and what people feel on the day. So everyone happy for me and Neil to make a call on that one?
Yeah.
Great.
Apologies, Benita. My understanding is that Stats New Zealand are able to provide updates in between the 2 census dates, and so that any information that we receive, which is more up to date, more accurate, will provide better decision making theoretically.
Okay.
So therefore, I recommend that you support this remit, but don't expect it to go too far.
Yeah.
And it'll be a bigger issue in growth areas of high growth, which obviously Taranaki is not.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Mike. That's really helpful. The next one feels like it's a remit that is always coming up, is that we advocate central government that councils can use community services card to assess use for council services.
Doesn't affect us unduly, does it?
Yeah, no, I don't think it affects us. Oh, we can use it for public transport now, which is good. Even
already in place.
Yeah. So mainly a district council matter, and I don't see any major issues to it, but any issues?
Seems to make sense. As I understand it, it's actually used for the rates rebate application process, which I suspect is one of the issues in here sitting in behind this. So that's something you might want to support. That implication, it does impact.
It does impact us.
Your ratepayers and how much they pay of your rate.
And it seems very much just a limitation of what's in legislation as opposed to actual principle. Okay, is everyone happy? Yeah, looks like we'll support. The next one is around that Maori wards and constituencies are treated the same as all other wards and should not be subject to referendum, and they oppose that bill. I guess this is pre the legislation passing, and we pretty much signed a letter from the council supporting this position. So it's kind of out of date, this remit, but
yes, although if you read it one way, it could mean that you're going to have to do referendums for everything. If we're going to have to,
that is a good point.
Are we having to every time you want to do everything?
You can, of course, do a referendum at any time if you so wish, and it's provided for. But that is part of the argument: is what's the difference between Maori wards versus general wards, and indeed, those different options of whether you have district-wide councillors or region-wide councillors versus ward councillors. Why would they also not go to referendums if demanded? That's the thinking.
All I was just thinking was
word it carefully.
You don't want to pass something that has unintended consequences of trying.
Yeah, I see what you're
some people
saying,
would
yeah.
say, well, you have to have therefore referendum for at ward, at large, at any other thing you want. I don't think this is going anywhere much anyway, but just the same, if you think about it, there's a sort of reverse logic in it as well.
Okay, so everyone happy? I mean, it's a bit out of date now, but we signed a letter supporting this kind of thing, so it makes sense that we support it going forward. Yep.
Hopefully there might be an amendment or something to tidy that aspect up.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just lost my. Just let me get back to the right page. Zoom through. Number 4, entrenchment of Maori wards and seats for local governments. So lobby to entrench Maori wards and constituencies for the 64 councils that currently have these and require the support of a supermajority of Parliament, should either Parliament or council seek their removal, which is a slight nuance on the previous one. Any happy to leave that one for me and Neil on the day? Yep, great. The graduated driver's licensing scheme to advocate for the fee structure for driver licensing, better preparing young people for driver license testing and greater testing capacity. Yep, everyone happy to support? Great.
Interestingly enough, people have been coming up to Hara to get their licenses because Wanganui is so blocked up with licenses.
Ah, really? That's interesting. Yeah, I do a lot of stuff in the workforce development space, and it's interesting that driver's license is one of the major barriers to people progressing forward. So there's stuff going on.
You don't have any
still a lot of work.
traffic lights, Neil.
Number 6 is have a proactive lever to mitigate the deterioration of unoccupied buildings. Again, mainly a district council issue. Seems to make sense reading it, but should we, everyone know no one's got any strong views either way, so we'll listen to the debate and vote on the day. Right.
Just probably need to be careful that, like Neil said, for one of the other things is that there are maybe unidentified issues that could impact upon
consequences. Yeah. So we'll listen out for the debate on that one and see. So I'm just scanning through all the attachments. Number 7 is on page 333. So we have LGNZ proactively promote lobby for the development of a more equitable and appropriate funding model for central government initiatives, which I know something that Craig's talked about passionately and a number of other people have. So everyone happy to support this one. I think it's already pretty much local government New Zealand position anyway, but yeah, so that's that one. Oh, sorry, the next one's the goods and services tax revenue sharing with local government, which everyone, comfortable to support. Yeah, makes sense. Don't think it's going to happen, but might as well.
Totally agree.
Again, Madam Chair, isn't there a proposal currently before the government of actually providing extra money for councils as they build extra houses? So the idea is that they would get a refunded portion of the GST. Hearing from people who are in this one, there's also a bit of a problem because it now looks like the government might be saying that they'll give it back, but only after you exceed your previous year's total. So again, this is another one which probably has a lot of other behind the scenes things that need to be looked at.
Thanks, Neil. Good points there. Great, thanks for that. Appreciate the feedback and going through those. I'll provide an update after the AGM of what happened, so everyone's aware. So the recommendations on this one are on page 286 to receive the memorandum, provide guidance, and determine that we've complied with decision-making provisions of the Local Government Act. I'm happy to move those. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Alan. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, nay. Agenda item 13 is the Taranaki Maori constituency poll requirement. So Nicole, let's speak to this one again.
Thank you, Charlotte, for me. In May of 2024, the Minister of Local Government announced changes to the Local Electoral Act, which received royal assent and came into force.
Nicole, is your microphone on?
just now. Sorry, Benita. So in May 2024, the Minister of Local Government announced changes to the Local Electoral Act, which received royal assent and came into force on the 31st of July. These changes were a part of the coalition agreement and have introduced legislative provisions allowing for binding polls on the establishment of Māori constituencies, along with transitional arrangements for those councils that resolve to establish a Māori constituency in 2020 and beyond without holding a poll. The background section of the report before you outlines the process that this council undertook, including a public consultation, before ultimately deciding in April 2021 to establish the Taranaki Māori constituency for the 2022 local authority elections. The council now needs to comply with the new transitional arrangements, which requires it to either resolve to disestablish or retain the Māori constituency, or to allow the community to have their say and hold a binding poll alongside the 2025 local elections. Both of these options are discussed in the paper. Should the council decide to disestablish, this decision would apply from 2025 and 2028 elections and require council to undertake a shortened representation review by the end of April 2025. If council chooses to undertake a referendum on the matter, poll will be held alongside the 2025 elections and the Taranaki Māori constituency would be retained for that election. If the community decides through the poll to disestablish, the constituency would be disestablished at the 2028 local body elections, and we would be bound to that position for 2 trienniums. The paper outlines the 2 options that you have, along with the costs associated with undertaking the referendum and some other contributing factors that you should consider in making the decision. I'll hand the matter back to you, Charlotte, for discussion, and Steve, Mike and myself will be happy to answer any questions you might have. Great, so we've got the recommendations on page 3.
Madam Chairman, can I just ask, the Māori constituency would stays in place until 2028 if we opt for the poll?
If you opt for the poll, the Taranaki Māori constituency will be up for election at 2025 and 2028
for election.
For election 2025.
Yep.
And then the result of the poll will take effect from 2028.
Right. Yep.
Okay. Any further questions,
It
discussion?
has to be that way because otherwise you wouldn't be able to elect somebody
No.
in
You
2025.
can't
You wouldn't
redraw
know
the
whether
boundaries.
you can, you can't. So it has to be 2028.
It's reassuring that a poll will only cost $10,000 too, which could use to that.
And there is no option to retain and not do a poll.
No.
Not have to
under
take
law,
an
no.
active decision. Yeah.
Just for clarification, Nicole, if I can, you said that there was consultation prior to us going into the Maori wards. In fact, I don't think we had that opportunity to have a consultation or the poll because the Labor government at the time, the local minister, actually instructed all councils to actually create Maori polls, Maori wards. So there wasn't really, as far as I can remember, there was no real discussion around it. We started to, and then we were overruled by the local government minister. Is that?
I will defer that one to Mike. And the reason for that being is that in April, there was a report written following consultation. I believe it's 383 people submitted to council on their views around establishing the Taranaki Māori constituency. Whether the government allowed consultation on the matter,
I'll let Mike to summarise.
Through you, Chair, Nicole has hit that clearly. There was clearly no instruction from the central government to establish Māori constituency. We were undertook consultation and we got the feedback. There was a direction of travel heading in that direction, and a lot of councils exercised the freedoms that the change in the legislation gave up because they didn't want to necessarily engage in what are potentially divisive public debates. So I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Clearly, I remember consultation and submissions.
If you have a look in your archive books, the 6th of April 2021 council agenda has a copy of the submissions in it that were received. So it's in the archive books and diligently for those that 6th of April 2021 meeting.
Any further?
However, just to progress the thing, personally, that's history. We've now got a choice of the two situations. One is to get rid of the Maori board. The other one is to go for a referendum. And I personally feel it is a divisive issue. And we did make the decision before. So my view is I'd like to move that we actually go for the referendum option and let the people decide.
Yeah, I think it's, given we have to do it, and it's letting everyone have the voice in the vote. So I can see heads nodding. On that basis, I'm happy to move the recommendations. There's just a slight edit to recommendation B to say agrees to retain the Taranaki Maori constituency and that we undertake a referendum. So just going to make that minor edit to recommendation B, just for absolute clarity. So I'm happy to move those recommendations. Happy to second them. All those in favour say aye. Contrary nay. Great. Thanks, team. The next agenda item is to move to public excluded, which is on page 398. Recommendations there. I'm happy